The Great Gospel of John, Book 2. Let yourself be instructed by Jesus Christ himself. Very few people know that from 1851 to 1864, Jesus gave a much more complete story of the events that happened during his last 3 years before his crucifixion. A much more complete gospel than what we can find in the Bible. This was revealed by Jesus Christ himself to a man he chose, namely the Austrian Jakob Lorber, who dedicated the last 24 years of his life in the service of our Lord by writing down what he dictated to him through the inner word. He heard the words very clearly in the region of his heart and wrote them faithfully down. This total work consists of 25 books of 100 chapters each, an enormous, valuable spiritual treasure. It is up to each individual to discover and prove the many teachings that Jesus revealed to his disciples. Revelations that were not intended to reveal to the world at that time, but which are now revealed in a very clear way to us. Book 2. There is no copyright for this book. This is God's Word, and God's Word is free. It may be copied freely on condition that the text will not be changed. The original German book, Das Grosse Evangelium Johannes, 1851 to 1864. This book too is translated from the German Book 1, chapters 101 to 200. Chapter 1. The unusual wine miracle for Judas. When Peter had finished the song, he spoke in a most sombre tone. My friends and brethren, what a contrast between us and David once, when he gave the nation this glorious song of praise. As he sang, he lifted up his eyes to the stars, because then, according to men's concepts, Jehovah dwelt in the unapproachable light above all stars. But what would David now do here, since he, to whom he lifted up his eyes above all stars? I said, Halt, Peter. Friend, let it suffice, and consider all those we have among us. Peter remembers at once, and invites the guests to partake of the evening meal, consisting mostly in bread and well-cooked fish. But Judas inquires of Peter whether wine could be bought for money in this vicinity. And Peter replies, A couple of furlongs distance at the inn wine is sold. Hearing this, Judas further asks whether he has no one to send down for a barrel full. Says Peter, You know as well as I do that I have no one to send. But if you want wine, then go to the publican yourself, and strike a deal, and you shall come off the better. Says Judas, I shall rather do without than go myself. Says Peter, Do as you like. I can't spare you servants, as my fishers are still busy at sea, and my wife and children and in-laws have their hands full, as you can see. You are not going to ask me to cart a whole barrel here at night by myself. Says Judas, somewhat annoyed, Now, I only meant well, seeing you have no wine, because I myself would have paid for it, no matter what price. Says Peter, There is one among us who converted water into wine at Cana, at the wedding of Simon, who also is here. The one could also do so now, if necessary. Since, however, it surely is not necessary, we can also make do with the very choice water from my well. Says Judas, Right enough. I am happy therewith too, since I myself greatly commend good water. Yet, precisely on an occasion like this, wine would not go amiss. But since this one, whom I too deem myself to know, is capable of making water into wine, he surely could also do you the favour. I said, So go down to the well and drink, because to you the well shall supply wine, but to us all just water. Judas at once went down to the well and drew. But as he drank from the water drawn, it was wine of the best kind, and he got so drunk as to be prostrated by the well, in danger of falling into the well, which was deep, had not some of Peter's servants spotted him, bringing him into the house and into a bed. But it was good thus, because that evening I healed many of all kinds of sicknesses and plagues, and exorcised many of their evil spirits, and in the face of such signs, Judas would have been a nuisance. Chapter 2. The healing of all sick people in Capernaum. When all who were with me had finished supper, while Judas slept on a straw mattress in the outhouse, those same Jews who the previous day had put the priests, scribes, and Pharisees to the test, brought a great many possessed, and a great many others suffering all kinds of ills, imploring me to heal them all. And I asked them in a lovingly earnest manner whether they believed that the Nazarene carpenter's son was able to do so, because these people knew me, so to speak, from birth. But they answered and said, What have we to do with the carpenter's son? If the carpenter's son was chosen of God to become a prophet to the people of Israel, then he is a prophet, even if 1,000-fold carpenter's son, because each man is what he is out of God, and never what his parents were. And so we believe without doubt that you are firstly a God-tutored prophet, and that you therefore secondly can help everyone, as you helped the son of the city councillor and the centurion's servant. And I answered them, Now then, since your faith in me and your assessment of me are such, be it done to you according to your faith. Upon this word, all the spirits left the possessed, and those suffering all kinds of sickness and plagues became well instantly. It hardly needs to be described how astonished and grateful they were. After that, many fitting but also bitingly sharp remarks were made about the Jewish priesthood. But I rebuked the accusers and showed them it is unwise to awaken a brood of sleeping vipers. For as long as they are hibernating, they are without harm and danger to anyone. But on awakening, they are more dangerous than at other moments when they are not asleep. Those temple servants, full of cunning and malice, had indeed been sleeping like a brood of vipers in winter. But through your bold request, you have forcibly roused them from sleep. Guard against their harming you, therefore, because this adulterous kind derives lascivious pleasure from doing harm. All recognise the truth of this lecture and regret the mischief they brought about by their rashness. But I comfort them and tell them not to divulge the sign worked here at Capernaum, except to some trusted friends of truth, who also know how to keep silence. And they assured me of it. But there was one amongst them who, although not counted among the priesthood, nevertheless was very well versed in the Scriptures. This one stepped in front of the crowd, speaking in an earnest manner. "Listen, beloved friends and brothers. In this deed I have discovered something which bespeaks more than just saying, 'See, this man is a true prophet.' I believe that this act took place in fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah, when he spoke, 'Surely he has borne our grief and carried our sorrows.' Don't you notice anything?" The people looked at the speaker in astonishment, not understanding him. He repeats his question, and with the people still not grasping his quotation from Isaiah, he says, "It is not easy to preach about the colours of the rainbow to the blind." I said, "Calm down. It is better for these people not to grasp it for the present. Because if these people were to grasp this immediately, they would run over to the priests and start a mighty argument, and this should be good neither for yourselves nor from the viewpoint of my teaching. But when the right time comes, they shall grasp even with the hands what the prophet was saying." The speaker settled down with that, while the crowd, whose possessed and sick I had healed this evening, left with their healed. But when the crowd arrived at home in Capernaum, they caused a furore among their acquaintances. And when the next morning hardly began to dawn, Peter's house already was surrounded by an immeasurable crowd, wanting to see me, who had performed such incomprehensibly immense wonder. And Peter asked me what should be done, since the crowd continued growing. I said, "Get the large boat ready, and we shall go to the other side of the sea. Otherwise there will be trouble here. Although the people are here with the best intention, also the priests are sneaking up behind them. And at this stage, we do not want to have anything to do with them." Peter immediately made the largest ship ready, which we soon boarded and began to sail fast across the sea, helped by a fair wind. However, before I had boarded the ship with the disciples, a teacher of the law from Capernaum came up to me and said, "Rabbi, allow me to follow you where you are going." But since I saw that his secret motive in wishing to follow me was by no means an honourable one, and that he was not much interested in my teaching and all my deeds, but only wanted to be provided for, and if profitable, commit secret acts of treachery, I shook my head and said to him, "The foxes have their holes, the birds under the sky have their nests, but the Son of Man has in this world not even a stone belonging to him upon which he may lay his head." And the man understood me, turned away and went home. For thereby I gave him to understand that he, too, was a cunning fox, and had his hole, a paid position, and that birds of his kind living under the sky, that is, a feeding and resting place, where they consumed their prey. But that with the Son of Man nothing is to be found of all the worldly deceit, not even a so-called political emergency trick, stone, upon which one could occasionally rest the head of one's mind. The teacher of the law, as already mentioned, did understand me correctly, and quickly returned to Capernaum without any further argument. Chapter 3. Jesus and the Storm. Before we boarded the ship, one of my disciples came to me, asking for my permission to bury, before we left, his father who had died so suddenly the previous night. I, however, said to him, "You better follow me, and let the dead bury their dead." And the disciple immediately refrained from his request and followed me into the ship, for he understood that it is better to be concerned with life than with death, a futile concern, indeed, best suited for the dead, for all those who make much of funeral pomp are more or less dead. They pay their respect to the death, and the honour of death is most important to them. Man's true death is selfishness, and its spirit is pride, which above all craves for glory. Thus, the pompous funeral of a deceased is nothing else but the last display of pride of a person who has been spiritually dead for a long time. When the disciple had grasped the full depth of the truth I spoke to him, he followed me into the ship without misgivings, as already remarked, and we quickly sailed off with a good wind, escaping the growing onrush of the crowd. Some indeed boarded the small craft, following us for a short distance. But as the wind grew mightier, they quickly turned back, and reaching shore safely before the start of the storm. But we had already reached the high sea, when the former favourable wind turned into a mighty storm. Having been somewhat tired already at boarding time, in that I had been awake all night, I therefore said to Peter in the boat, "Prepare me a resting place, as I intended to take a little rest during the voyage, having, as you know, found no rest during the night." Peter at once brought me several mattresses, making me a good place of rest, and adding a pillow under my head, whereupon I soon fell asleep good and proper, physically, although knowing the wind would soon turn into a mighty storm, menacing the ship with waves soaring. When we were some 2 hours offshore, the rage of the storm was peaking and the swell began to surge over the deck. Even my most tried disciples became faint as they saw the ship take water with the swelling surf, especially over the middle section, the lowest part in accord with the prevalent shipbuilding style. As the storm showed no sign of abating, but instead only whipping the sea higher, the disciples stepped over to me, on the most elevated spot where Peter had made my resting place, out of the waves' reach, and started shaking me awake, yelling with trepidation, "Lord, help us, or we all perish!" Whereupon I rose from my resting place, saying to them, "O ye of little faith, why are ye fearful when I am with you? What is more, the storm, or he who is Lord also over all storms?" Nevertheless, since the disciples, as well as several others on board, became practically speechless from fear, and even a Peter could only stammer, I immediately rebuked the storm and the sea, and all was suddenly becalmed. The storm was as if cut off, while the sea became mirror smooth, save for a small ripple where our oarsmen stirred it. The fairly large number of people, however, who had not been more closely associated with me, having only arrived that morning, making this journey for business rather than on my account, began to marvel beyond all measure, saying to the disciples and asking, "What manner of man is this in Jehovah's name, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" But I gave a sign to the disciples not to give me away, and Peter said, "Ask not, but all of ye be about bailing out the exceeding waters from the boat, lest we perish from a follow-up storm, which often follows a quick becalming like the present." Whereupon the strangers asked no more, but grabbed hold of the buckets and nimbly ladled the water out, being fully occupied therewith until we reached the extensive opposite shore. Chapter 4. The Healing of the Possessed. The tiny country, or rather district, we came to was inhabited by a small race known as the Gergenes, or Gadarenes, which occupied the entire opposite length of the Sea of Galilee. When we had all stepped ashore there, and were about to head for the small city of Gadara, situated on a rise some 6,000 paces from our landing place, there came running from a hill topped by this city's cemetery, opposite the town and along the seas, 2 naked men of a terribly contorted appearance, who were possessed by an entire legion of spirits, of such fierceness that hardly anyone could get through along this road because of them. Their dwelling place were the graves of the above cemetery. None could catch or shackle them with chains, because even where a crowd of the strongest people managed to subdue them, putting them in a heavy chains and shackles, the chains were broken instantly and the shackles rubbed to powder. They were on the hill and in the graves day and night, screaming dreadfully and mightily beating themselves with stones. When these 2 became aware of myself among the disciples, however, they ran straight towards me, falling down before me and yelling, "What have we to do with thee, thou Son of the Most High? Art thou come to torment us before the time? We beseech thee, by the Most High, not to torment us." But I rebuked them, saying, "What is your name, evil spirit, who torments these 2 as if they were one man?" And the evil one cried, "My name is Legion, for there are many of us." But I commanded the evil one to depart from these 2. Instantly a vast number of evil spirits departed visibly from the 2, in the shape of large black flies, but pleading with me that I would not drive them out of this district. There was along the hills straddling the sea, however, a great herd of swine belonging to the Gadarenes, because this little race, consisting mostly of Greeks, ate the flesh of these animals, trading therewith mainly with Greece. When the evil spirits spotted these pigs, they once again implored me for their entering into this herd. And when I acceded to their request, for reasons secret and concealed from the world, the devils instantly entered the pigs, some 2,000 in all. As soon as the devils had entered the swine, these animals ran up a hill, which ended with a great cliff jutting into the sea, with a sheer drop of about 300 yards, with all the 2,000 swine properly storming into the sea, where it was very deep. When, however, the shepherds who watched over the swine saw what had taken place with the possessed, they fled appalled. Rushing into the city, telling especially their employers what took place down at sea. The inhabitants of this little city took fright, and one who, like many in this city, still was a pagan, placing much store by Jupiter and all the other pagan gods, spoke, saying, "Did I not tell you this morning? Once the two tormented by the Furies calm down, with the sea going strong beyond measure in spite of a bright sky, a god comes down and judgment follows, because the gods never come down to earth from the stars without the rod and the sword. And we have it right here before us. The Furies who tormented the two sinners first stir up the sea, as they were certain that a god would come down from above and drive them out of the two sinners. That they then threw themselves upon our swine in the form of black horseflies, storming these animals into the sea, is now clear to me as the sun in broad daylight. We have now no choice but to betake ourselves in all humility and remorse down to the god, probably Neptune or Mercury, and beg him to soon leave this area again, for as long as a god tarries in a district of the earth visibly, there can be no thought but of misfortune upon misfortune. Because, as said, a god never comes down to earth from the stars without the rod, sword, and judgment. But not even with the most secret thoughts let any of us reproach him for the damage inflicted upon us, because that would be the end of us. For a long time now, we have not brought the old gods a proper sacrifice, from which the foolish Jews held us back more than anyone else, by wanting to know everything better than us, and therefore an offended God took his own sacrifice. Thus it is. Therefore, we must not allow even a thought of dissatisfaction to surface in us. But down we must go to greet him, and then implore him to leave this district again at once. But quite a few Jews listened to this lecture as well, and said, "You indeed consider us stupid, yet this thing we know more about than you. See, this your purported God is none other than either a Persian magician, or it is the renowned Jesus of Nazareth, of whom we already heard great things. But we otherwise agree with you that we should implore him to leave this area, because such people never are a blessing for a country. This we know from the days of our prophets. Where God awakens certain people in some nation as prophets, the misfortune for such country is sealed." Thereupon the whole city got together and moved down to me, leaving behind only a few sick. When the arrivals caught sight of me and saw that I had a completely natural human appearance, they took courage to approach me, and although still fearful, stepped up to me, begging me to leave their borders soon. Some, however, studied the two whom they formerly had well known as possessed. Both were clad now, and conversed with them intelligently, relating to them how I had freed them from their plague, and how they immediately were clad by those who had come with me. But none of this could diminish the fear, especially that of the pagans, and they asked for nothing but my departure and no return. And I acceded to their request, and then said to Peter, "Friend, get the ship ready again at once, that we may leave this area as soon as possible." And Peter and his servants got the ship ready at once. But as I boarded the ship, the two healed hurried after me, asking me whether they could follow me, because they would obtain no work or living in this city, and their relatives at home were bound not to have them, due to their great fear of them. But I turned them away in a friendly, earnest manner, saying, Return to yours cheerfully, as they shall receive you with joy. But go and proclaim it to yours, and to all the region too, what great thing the Lord has done for you, and what mercy he has shown you. And in this way you shall do greater good than by following me now. Because in this area, where you are known by one and all, you are to bear proper witness, and thus become useful to men. And people shall, as before when they still feared you, not let you starve. With that, the two healed departed as one man, and eagerly did as I commanded them. The two of them in a short time glorified my name, not only in their native land, but in the 10 cities straddling the upper sea coast too, everywhere proclaiming with much zeal what great thing I had done for them, and the great mercy I had shown them. And many therewith believed on my name, generating much longing for me in Jew and Greek alike.